Awesome. So we've gone over the ribs, the purpose of the ribs.
What kind of glue do you use to attach the ribs?
We just use the hot hide glue that we also use to glue the fabric to the wood. It's all the same. It's a reversible animal-based gelatin glue. So, when you have checked this flap valve and this flap valve, obviously the internal one is the one that matters the most at this step because you can't reach it again after this has been completely recovered. The external one you can reach at any point in time.
So that's tested also by attaching the
yes,
vacuum to the trunk.
to the trunk.
And then listening with your, just a tube in your ear is
Yep.
all?
Yeah.
And then just going around the perimeter?
Going around the whole perimeter of this valve to see. Because over time, these valves will tend to curl. The valve leather starts to shrink a little bit. And the smooth side shrinks faster than the suede side. So that's what pulls the edges of the valve up, and then it stops sealing. So
How do you, and so that's to check the valve that leads to the trunk. How do you check the valve, the external flap valve?
So what you then do, since this system doesn't work like you're saying, you have to create a manifold to set over these holes, which basically is the exact same thing as these other manifolds. So you can cover all those holes, provide the suction, and then listen to this outside valve. Which
So do you just like build a box of some kind, put maybe a leather gasket around and just push it
exactly.
with your hand?
Yeah,
to
it doesn't
seal
need to be screwed or anything.
And then connect the
Connect the vacuum to it.
vacuum to a port. So we could build that using, so these are all salvage parts. We could just grab
Yeah.
an elbow and an
Yeah.
old tube from that to create.
Exactly.
Okay. All right.
And that makes it super easy. And a lot of the time, you can see, if you come up and look at this, how much real estate there is around these openings here. So you have almost a half an inch of leather on both sides that's meant to be able to seal. A lot of the times with a brand new piece of leather, it's very, very supple. So even if the leather isn't laying perfectly flat, the vacuum will suck it flat. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
And that's what you're just verifying with that to make sure that there's no imperfections that are letting the air sneak by. But since there is suction that's pulling this valve in the check state, it's pulling that seal down and making it conform to it. But when these get petrified, they don't conform anymore. They just curl and they get rigid and they peel up and they stay peeled up, and that's how the air leaks by. So if you do replace them, odds are you're going to be completely fine with the seal because the new leather is so supple, it will conform to those inlets.
When you make your manifold and then you do your listening test,
Uh-huh.
which side do you listen around the perimeter of the manifold, or do you listen on the other side?
So you listen to the perimeter of this valve right here. This side isn't as necessary because it's usually mechanically attached, and so it's being forced to be part of that. But here, where there's no mechanical attachment to this, that's where you're listening around to make sure that there's no leaking.
So the manifold is on the other side.
Yeah, the manifold's just providing the suction on
Right,
this
right,
side
got it,
to
got it,
tell.
Okay.
And so that's why I'm saying with a new piece of leather, it's so supple that the suction from the one side should just be able to pull this leather down into that face and seal it really well. The testing method is sort of for just testing the old ones to make sure that they're not leaking if you want to keep them. It's not that much work, as you can tell, just to pop 2 rivets, lay a new piece of leather down, and go from there. So those are the two options you have available
What's
to
the
you.
purpose of this being separate here?
So this spring is actually missing a component that this side actually has. So there's a staple here that is supposed to be pushing this spring forward.
Oh, that's
So-
keeping it taut.
That's keeping the tension on this valve and allowing it to be right there, ready to be sucked back down the moment that it experiences vacuum,
It lay flat.
just to help it lay flat. Yeah, so this one, there's a staple that used to be there, and then it's been removed. I mean, probably Nacho removed it so he could do the work around this one, but that's just there to keep those valves taut. There's one set on the outside and another set on the inside to keep those valves in place. Now, there is a lot of debate in the player piano world about what type of material to use, what construction, what animal, whatever for replacing these valves. Typically, you'll find, about as many options under the sun for construction as there are player piano builders. Like this one, I've actually not seen personally yet, where they stitched a piece of canvas to the back side of it and had the leather inside and canvas outside, stitched all the way around the perimeter, all that sort of stuff. Some player piano builders will have sheet metal on the back and then the leather on the inside to help keep it rigid and be able to seal really easily. It all depends on what has been working, what hasn't been working. So when you see the metal ones, your best bet is to not touch them. Because that sheet metal is so thin, if it bends, it will never seal again. You've ruined it. And most often the time, it's the front facing that's leather is in good shape. A lot of the times leather is in good shape. You don't need to touch them. These that don't have any kind of backing are allowed to, well, this one has a backing actually. And it seems like it's still laying pretty flat. But a lot of the times you'll see just a plain old piece of leather, no help whatsoever, just nailed, few nails on this side, few nails on that side, and that sort of stretches it out, and that's what lets it puff and go by. Those are the ones that you really, really have to worry about the curling, because they have no mitigation for keeping them flat over the years. And so those you'll see will start to, they tend to buckle here in the middle, and they'll curl up and stay curled like that even when they're in the resting position. So the valves that I've seen be the most successful are the leathers that come from the leather company with a pre-finished side. So one side actually has a paint that's impregnated into the smooth side. It's pre-stretched, it's impregnated with paint, and it's not going to move anywhere. And then it's got the suede side that then seals. That's the easiest replacement I've ever seen for these specifically, because all of these other models, while they have taken the effort to put the stitches on, put backing and stuff on, it does about the same, and it lasts about the same as just that pre-finished leather that I'm talking about. So the most cost-effective and the most real-world effective is just that pre-finished leather and just nailing it back in place. If you have these mechanical assisting devices, reuse those, because anything that allows for the leather to be slightly shrunk, to be, organic, because leather is organic, and mitigate that, that's good to keep. Otherwise, if it's just nailed on both sides, just put nails back. But if they give you the hardware, use the hardware, because it's usually in better shape.
Do we have that leather and suede?
I don't think we do. I have the product that I can send to you to get on order. And if we need to, just for the expediting of this, I have some in stock. So,
how do you connect the suede with the leather?
They're pre-attached. They're pre-finished together. So that whole piece just comes as a whole skin, and you can just cut it straight out of that, and it's ready to go. Okay. And so then you just drive the nails straight through those two pieces. And since it is a paint on the one side, you do have to scuff it and rough it up for it to be able to glue like blocks like this onto the end of it. But we can kind of get into those details when it comes time. We use it as bellows rib leather because it's pre-stretched and it doesn't move. So our giant wind bellows in the pipe organs, that's what stabilizes all of the joints that holds the ribs together. Anyway, that's a side note. That's not important.
Do you know where I can order that suede leather pre-finished sheet?
Yes, Columbia Oregon Leathers has
Columbia,
that.
okay.
That's where we get ours. Okay, so on to the actual reattaching of this material to the bellow. So, what you do when you start out, you've got your pre-cut strip down both sides. You set this opening to the width that you've got for the sheet material. Then you glue across the front, a lot like you do with the Striker pneumatics or any of the other pneumatics. You glue across this whole surface But you'll see here, and actually I'm going to do a little bit of amending. So you've got your thickness here for how wide this is open, but on these feeders, this design specifically, they have a lip that comes down past this edge, so that we make a right angle down here. So if you look, you can see that the rubber cloth is actually glued downwards as well. And it's been slit in these corners to make it around that corner there. So you'll need to add a little bit of length to accommodate for that, and you can see that it's been done here as well, where this material is actually glued into the corner like that. So we'll need to add, oh, you measured this, you didn't measure the opening, so we've added that technically. So when you glue the front of this, you want to make sure to press into that corner to get all of the glue in contact where it needs to be, and make that airtight seal across there. So once you've done that, it's important, I think, to let that edge dry completely. Because when we go to try and pull this material around this corner here, you're asking a very thick material to make a very hard bend right around that corner. So having this piece be completely dry all the way out to the corners is going to give you the best chance at a completely airtight joint possible. Most of the time when these feeders are recovered incorrectly, you will get leaks at all of the corners because you're asking that really big thick material to make that really tight bend. So to give ourselves the best chance at that, let this whole side dry first before you try and glue.
Top and bottom.
Top and bottom.
You do that at the same time?
Yeah, because this material, it's just flat like this, so you can do both of those at the same time.
Okay. Do you put a wedge in or something to hold it?
Yeah, typically that's what we'll do. And then since it's glued from the front and it's all finished, you can just remove the wedge from the side and then proceed to finish covering down the edges. So since this is glued down to the surface here, you do have to remember then, before you go down these sides, to make these slits in the material up to these corners so that it's allowed to bend properly without trying to peel itself back up. Because as you know, trying to come on the flat and make a corner with a canvas material doesn't work very well. So you can see here, these have obviously been split. You can see that they've had that cut so that it looks like there's a right angle notch so that your flange can continue down. The other thing that we do to try and keep this from peeling up while you're trying to wrench around this corner is put tack nails through the rubber cloth into the edge of this board. Those nails act like a mechanical fastener to keep that material from trying to bulge back out both in the future and while you're trying to recover this pneumatic.
Tack nails in the corners?
Yeah, so right here in the middle of that corner.
Where can I get those tack nails?
What do you call it? Artists' canvas stretchers. A lot of the times they'll have tack nails in a big selection. Because that's how they stretch the canvas over the frames and then they tack nail around all the edges. You can do that. They've got some of them at Home Depot. They don't have a very big selection at Home Depot. They've got really fat ones, which always concern me because I don't want to split this wood by doing that. So I typically try to use just artist canvas makers because they have much thinner ones that they can just apply for this situation. Don't try and save the old ones. It's just a waste of time. And they're always rusted to death, so they won't work that well anyway. So we do put those tack nails in, then you're ready to glue down the sides. So when you're doing this, you don't have this kind of a taper pre-done already because you've just cut out a straight sheet. So when you come down the side, you're going to look something like this, where it's, getting progressively bigger and bigger. That's okay. You just find the place that this material is the happiest. Because if you find a place that material is comfortable being, that's the most important part, because then it won't fight the function in either direction. If you're building tension into the system by trying to stretch it into the place that you think it should be, there's going to be tension one way and a relaxation the other way, and that's going to also cause stress to the material and cause it to wear out even faster. So when you come around this corner, it's not always going to be the case that it's going to lay perfectly in the middle. You can allow it to sit wherever it's the most comfortable while still maintaining a tight corner both on top and on bottom. So you want to add just a little bit of pull just to keep these corners tight while you're pulling this down. And then you're going to massage this joint and try and get that hide glue to tack really nicely. Once it's been massaged and it's tacked and it's ready to, if you let go, it's not going to fall off immediately. You can then take more of your tacks and then just anchor them down here at the hinge end to keep that tension on it while you do the rest of the massaging and making sure that all of the glue joints are very tight and airtight. So this one again, you'll have this flange. You can see where the paint doesn't exist here. So your material is going to come down and then it's going to go flat so that there's an L of material there. That is primarily, it is one for sealing, but two, it's primarily to give this lower section more wood to be glued to for strength purposes. Because if you just tried to glue to this very thin edge and stop right there, you've only got maybe about 6 millimeters, quarter inch of glue surface there to hold this big heavy cloth that's trying to be ripped inside by all of that vacuum that it's producing. So it is important to keep this design and glue that down to this surface. And you have to be kind of clever through a series of relief cuts. So we've talked about this corner relief cut. That's going to do a great job. So you're going to get to this corner, and now your material is coming straight off the edge, and you want to ask it to come this way now. So what you do, and you can kind of see from the old material, which is why looking at and documenting all of the old folding patterns is really important, because you can see how they attached it, and you can mimic that. So what you're going to do, and you can see it's not glued here, so you're going to cut right there, and that's going to free it from this plane, meaning that the only thing that the material is connected to down here is this plane, so it can bend over this hinge end much simpler.
Where do you cut it?
So you cut it right here because you're coming from this plane outwards, so you've got an L shape coming straight off your end. You cut the bottom one so then it's back to a flat piece, and then you can bend it around this back side here.
Okay.
So those are just the relief cuts that are necessary.
And you wait until the sides of the plates are dry before doing that?
Before doing that. So yeah, exactly. Just do one side at a time, let it dry, move on to the next side. Now, the hinge end is just canvas, and we need that to seal, but we don't need to use this big, fat, heavy material because the hinge is built out of canvas, so it's strong already, but we just need that airtight seal. What I recommend, typically, and what I've seen a lot of rebuilders do, is they use this intermediate rubber cloth. It's thicker than the motor cloth, or the Striker pneumatic cloth, which is very thin, very supple, but it's thinner than this really big, heavy stuff, so it's that intermediate point. So what I like to do, while I'm waiting for these two ends to dry, I take and I fit a piece of that material over this full hinge end, because then that will seal that section, obviously, because it's just canvas right through there, canvas and wood, so it needs to be able to have an airtight seal. So you just run that along there, and then that has sealed the air into this chamber. Once these two sides are dried, you take your edges and you wrap them probably about 2 inches or so. You can kind of see the old one. They've come up about 2 inches or so to give overlap in the system, because that's where you've created a seam. And anywhere you have a seam in a pneumatic system, you have to make sure that it is sealed. So you've got your piece glued down all the way to the edge like this. You're coming in.
You're talking about of the medium rubber cloth?
Of a medium rubber cloth. This piece right here is medium rubber cloth.
Okay. And it doesn't go over the edges.
And it doesn't go over the edges, no. Because we've got this big cloth coming over the edge like this, and then we're going to wrap it around the top of that rubber cloth, and we're going to then tack it down, making sure to make this corner nice and tight, pulling it really tight in the process.
Okay. And so the thick cloth only goes a few inches. It doesn't
Yeah.
go all the way over to meet the other side.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So that's where this differs from all of the other pneumatics in the piano. Because if we did use this really big, thick, heavy stuff all the way across, you'd be asking this fat cloth to try and compress as this thing lifts like this, and it will try to resist that. And then if you're trying to force it to do something it doesn't want to do, that's also going to create wear because you're compressing that rubber like it doesn't want to, and then that will create a split, and then it will start to leak. So by using that thinner material underneath, and it's underneath down here too, so even if we are, just breaking our rule that we just laid by making this material create that bend, there is that other material right underneath it creating that seal all the way to that corner. And then that's been plenty in my experience. Good to go for another 40, 50, 60 years, depending on how well people treat it. If it gets put in a barn, you got 2 years.
Right.
And so when I do, a side note, when I do go around these corners, both the front and the back, you don't want to create the tension, gluing down the side, but when you get to these corners, you want to create tension. You want to stretch this material as taut as you can around that corner and then tack it right there. So you can really get as much force around this as possible to make sure that that does not leak any air. The other thing that they've done for this piano that I've had, I don't know, the results are mixed in my opinion.
So on the lower corner, you don't want tension.
No, sorry, all corners you
All
want
corners you
tensions.
want tension.
Yeah. Just no lateral tension when you're laying this material down the side.
I see.
You don't want it to be cranked up or cranked down like that. But you do want tension around the corner to
Okay.
make sure that that seals. So it's a bit of a juggling act. They can be a little bit tricky, but once you get them down, they're not so bad.
Yeah.
The other thing that they've done right here, you can see, where you've created these slits up to this corner to try and let the material, make this flat contact all the way around. They put what are called darts. They're reinforcing leather seals, basically. So you've created a weak point, not a weak point, you've created a lesser sealing portion where there's a gap in the flat portion of this rubber cloth because you had to trim it in that corner. So you just go back with a little leather circle and you just glue it straight over the top of that so that if there is any issues with this corner sealing around this very small piece of wood, this is reinforcing that and creating a plug to try and keep air from sneaking under and into that.
So there are
That
4
balance.
leather circles, darts, or
Yes,
8?
one for each of the corners on the bottom side.
And then how about the top?
The top is okay because it's the full thickness and it's being able to be wrapped around that almost half-inch piece. Down low, we've only got this very
Got the
thin,
bottom fold.
very thin piece, and
Yeah.
you're asking the material to...
What kind of material do we use for the darts?
leather is fine, any kind. I would probably recommend using your gasket leather because it's very supple. So when you apply the glue, you can press it and it will fill any voids that it finds. If that makes sense. Do you still have a chunk of that gasket leather, Nacho? Yeah, this. So you can feel how soft and weak this leather is.
Oh.
So when you put glue on that and then you press it into that corner, that's going to squish into every void that it finds and create an airtight seal.
And how much glue do you use?
I usually just brush the side, the suede side. Just a thin layer is all it really needs. Because the glue is acting like just a medium to hold the leather in place while the leather is doing most of the actual work of sealing anything that's not airtight.
You cut it out with like a punch?
Yeah, circle punch is great.
Okay.
You can see on this, they've used a circle punch as well. It's very common. It looks like it's about a 1/2 inch circle punch. Just enough to make sure that you've covered, basically got the equivalent of that rubber cloth right here. So you can see how far out this cloth comes and how far it comes out there. You want enough leather that you're just basically creating a radius. Yeah, you're continuing the turn, exactly. And creating that seal.
Material.
Exactly, yeah. Exactly. And then that will give you the best results. Any questions? Thanks, Nacho.
Same thing on the reservoir?
Yeah, these three are all exactly the same.
Okay.
The only difference is this reservoir does not get ribs inside of it, because typically it doesn't collapse far enough to need ribs, really. And so that's been sort of the common experience for me. It doesn't fold completely flat like the reservoirs do almost ever. It always hovers at just kind of like a, halfway sort of point. And it is always being stretched open when it's resting. So the ribs could have an opposite effect, where if the ribs accidentally got inverted, they would try to see if they could push the material out, and then the suction would try and pull it back in, and you could fold the rib in half on its way down. So they really don't do nearly as much or as effectively as they do on the feeders.
Does the reservoir need darts?
The reservoir does need darts, yes, because it has the same thin piece down there that you're trying to seal to. Okay, and then aside from that, obviously, just check all your gaskets. Like throughout the entire piano, you should always be checking your gaskets for these portions. With this plate screwed down, this nipple is screwed here. Always be checking all of your gaskets.